Hello, everybody. So, we're now going to be looking at carbohydrates as part of our nutrition module. Okay, so first of all, looking at what's the role of carbohydrates? And the main role of carbohydrates is a provision of energy. Our cells use a mixture of carbohydrates and fats for energy, and our muscles actually rely on carbohydrates to be able to contract, especially when our energy intensity is really, really high. So we need a really good proportion of carbohydrates in our diet. So looking at the guidelines that we've got, the current government healthy eating guidelines is that if you look at the Eat Well guide, it recommends that just over a third of an individual's diet should be made up of starchy food, a third should be fruit and vegetables, which means that over half our calorie intake needs to come from our starchy foods and fruit and vegetables. So we need to get 50% of our energy around to be provided by carbohydrates. Now, obviously, this is going to vary depending on individuals. So, an average person around 50%. If you've got an athlete, someone who's using, huge amounts of energy up, they might need to be as high as 70%. And if someone's inactive, that might be more like 40 to 45%. Another important fact, as well as that 50%, is that 1 gram of carbohydrate provides 4 kilocalories of energy. Okay, so another part of carbohydrates is fiber, and this tends to be the more or indigestible part of a carbohydrate. And another word for them is another phrase is non-starch polysaccharides. And these are the main components of plant walls, plant cell walls. It's kind of like the skeleton of the plant. And plants and seeds have got these NSP elements in really abundant. So it's much more abundant in unrefined food than refined food. So it's really important to remember that as well as energy, an important function of carbs is that supplying of fiber. And there are two kinds of fiber. One is soluble and one is insoluble. So looking at soluble fiber, so this is found in oats and beans and also fruit and vegetables. And it's thought that this is partly digested by the bacteria of the gut. And so some of the elements of soluble fiber actually enter into our bloodstream and they help to reduce our blood cholesterol levels. So soluble fiber, really important in our diet. And so is insoluble fiber, because insoluble fiber we find in whole grain breads and cereals, and in wheat bran, and also in a wide range of fruits and vegetables. And this really helps our digestive tract and increasing bulk, and it just helps us to maintain a healthy digestive system. So here we go. Here's just a list of some of the benefits of dietary fiber. Adding bulk to our diet delays emptying of the stomach after a meal. So if we eat a reasonable amount of dietary fiber, it's going to stop us feeling hungry and hopefully help with weight loss. It remains intact as it passes through your gut, your alimentary canal. So it adds bulk to our waste, which helps with elimination. And it's also thought it plays a part in helping to prevent the development of bowel or colon cancer, as well as constipation. So let's have a little look at the structure of carbohydrates. So we're going to think about simple carbs and complex carbs. And our simple carbs are the first two lines. So we've got our what's called monosaccharides, mono being just one. So, and the three monosaccharides, our single sugar molecules, are glucose, fructose, and galactose. And then when they bind with when two monosaccharides bind together, we get disaccharides. So, and the examples that we have here are the three types actually of maltose, lactose, and sucrose. Now, for example, say maltose is actually two glucose molecules joined together, and lactose is a glucose and a galactose. So you can see how they're joined to make disaccharides. So those are the simple carbs, our monosaccharides and disaccharides. And our complex carbs are called polysaccharides. So where we've got a lot of these many monosaccharides or disaccharides joined together to make long chains of sugar molecules. So the carbohydrates we're going to look at can be divided into simple and complex. So here's a chart of simple, complex, and foods that have a mix of both in. So remember we said about sucrose, fructose, and glucose, and we can see that often we see glucose in energy drinks and in pouches and things like that. Sucrose is just our table sugar, and fruit has fructose. That's the kind of sweetness we get in fruit, the fructose. Other simple sugars include just sweets, jam, marmalade, honey, anything like that, anything that's very sugary and doesn't have any other fiber in or anything like that. So our soft drinks, they'll all give us a quick hit of carbohydrates. Now our complex carbohydrates that are much slower energy release sources are things like our breads and our pastas, especially when they're whole wheat, oats, potatoes, rice. But even in rice, you've got different kinds of rice. So, for example, basmati rice is a slower release than some of the quick cook rice. So there's a whole list there that you can have a look at that give you the idea of what would come under simple carbs, the more sugary ones, and the more complex carbs that are more our starches that we classically think of as carbohydrates. Obviously, when we are cooking food, we have a mix of both of these. So things like our biscuits and cakes and breakfast cereal, and also bananas have a mix of both simple and complex carbs in them. So we're going to introduce the idea of this thing called the glycemic index now. And it's recommended that our diet should be based on low glycemic index foods to try and prevent heart disease, obesity, diabetes. So the glycemic index is based on the effect that 50 grams of carbohydrates from any given food has on our blood glucose levels. And these are the immediate effects on blood sugar levels. And foods are rated as low, medium, or high. So let's have a little look at this. So if you've got too many carbohydrates in your system, you can have real fluctuations in energy as a result of changes in your body's blood sugar. And you can you can have dips in moods and irritability. And it's always been thought that it's been the simple carbohydrates that we looked at. So those are in the chart on the left, the kind of more sweets and the things that give you a quicker blood sugar hit were responsible for these because you get this fall in blood sugar levels and then you get the insulin level rebound. But it's actually known now that other factors play a part in all of this. So it's not just the simple carbs, but also the combination of other food components such as fiber and protein and fat. So we said about the glycemic index indicating how the impact on your blood sugar levels. So pure glucose would have a GI of 100. So that's the highest glycemic index level. So everything else is related to pure glucose. A high glycemic index food, which is 70 or more, would produce, like glucose would, a rapid rise in blood sugar. Moderate glycemic index foods are rated between 56 and 69 and cause a moderate rise, and low GI foods, which would be ranked as under 55, cause a much slower rise in your blood glucose levels. And if you look any of these things up, you'll see charts of different foods with a number usually between 20 and 100 to indicate their glycemic index levels. So as I say, most foods are given an index between 20 and 100, and it refers to the impact on your blood glucose when you eat that food on its own rather than as part of a meal. So obviously that's not always very realistic, so it's just a rough guide. But interestingly, you can't always say high GI foods are unhealthy, low GI foods are healthy, even though that is often the case. Because, for example, crisps have got a medium GI, but a baked potato's got a high GI, but a baked potato would be better for you than crisps because you've got the addition of fat and salt. Again, ice cream and chocolate have got a low to medium GI, so you can't presume that all low to medium GI foods are healthy. You have to be a little bit discerning. So another measure of a method to determine how rapidly a carbohydrate food releases its energy into the blood is this thing called glycemic load. So just another classification to measure the impact of carbohydrates on the body and on the blood sugar. So the glycemic load, you can see in that equation, is the glycemic index times by the amount of carbohydrate there is in a serving of food and then divided by 100. So you also get glycemic load rankings that you might see next to carbohydrates. And these two come under low, medium, and high. And that's just another way of looking at the impact of carbohydrates on our blood sugar. So there are a number of factors that affect both the glycemic index and the glycemic load. Often the more manufactured and processed a food is, it can be that the higher the glycemic index it's got. Not always, but often that's the case. So manufacturing processes will affect the GI, the kind of starch within the food, the kind of carbohydrate that it is. The way that it's cooked can also change things. They've worked out now that if you cook pasta and cool it and then either reheat it or eat it when it's cold, it has quite a different impact on your glycemic index than if you just eat it straight away when it's hot. Also, eating things in different combinations. So we said that the glycemic index looked at something when you were just eating it by itself, but if you're eating it with other things, it has a different impact on your blood glucose levels and the fiber content that any food contains. So even though there's no particular clinical condition associated with eating too much carbs, obviously eating too many results in intaking too high levels of calories, which can lead to obesity. Eating too many simple carbs like sugars cause dental decay, and if you have too much fiber, that can cause like diarrhea, and that limits the available absorption time for the nutrients. So you can actually become sort of malnourished if you're not having enough time for food to be in your gut and to break down all the nutrients at the correct rate. So that's overconsumption of carbs. And underconsumption of carbs, if you have a really low carb diet, then the most obvious result of that is going to be low energy, as we use carbohydrates for energy. And then there's this word this can cause gluconeogenesis. And so if we haven't got enough stores of glycogen within our muscles for what we need, the actual muscle can be broken down for energy. So that's gluconeogenesis, which is the breaking down of muscle to provide the body with energy. Now, the opposite of having too much fiber, having insufficient fiber, is going to lead to constipation, digestive disorders, and various implications from that cause an unhealthy gut. And that's the end of our look at carbohydrates. So, just to recall the main points, we're thinking that 50% of our energy should come from carbs. The main function is to provide energy. That both simple and complex carbs provide 4 kilocalories per gram. Both the glycemic index and the glycemic load relates to how its energy is released into the bloodstream. And ideally for health, people should be consuming low GI foods, low GI carbohydrates. We need to all have fiber as an essential part of our diet to make sure our gut functions properly, and recognizing that an overconsumption of carbs leads to obesity. Thanks all.